my fellow Americans.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
shouting. Just a moment.
I'm not defending them in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planting information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across, which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plant in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid, and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, A two-part question. What were the objectives of or what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding disinformation? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect, it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi or agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
And it might sound radical, colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun. It's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
Is the US a functioning democracy? Well, let's have a look at it. It costs $2 billion to become president. They have 25% of the total prisoners in the world. They spend over $800 billion a year on arms, which is more than most of the world put together. They've been at war for 250 years since their state was formed 275 years ago. But they can't afford universal health care. They can't afford the $1.7 trillion debt forgiveness for students. They can't afford a programme for the 17 million children that go to bed hungry. Is this a functioning democracy? What's your idea of a democracy?
We become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done, and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have
Yeah,
standards?
but here's the
to
problem.
ensure-
We
if I
can't
may,
even
this is
agree. We can't even
extremely-
agree what disinformation is.
This is-
You
well-
can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossier. If you can't agree to that, how are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this office, what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails, definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals
So
are
do you
not
think
impinged.
do you think
Number
COVID
one.
do you think
And number
COVID do
two,
you think COVID
if I may,
do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
You would know this this is a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
You killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war
George,
after
if
what
I was
you've
still
already
in
done.
Parliament,
I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party that's under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers who are driven by cowardly wokeness, who divide us by racializing every issue and stoking anti-white racism, who actively work to undermine our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution, who are hostile to people of faith and spirituality, who demonize the police but protect criminals at the expense of law-abiding Americans, who believe in open borders, who weaponize the national security state to go after their political opponents, and above all, who are dragging us ever closer to nuclear war. Now, I believe in a government that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. Unfortunately, today's Democratic Party does not. Instead, it stands for a government that is of, by, and for the powerful elite. Now, I'm calling on my fellow common sense, independent-minded Democrats to join me in leaving the Democratic Party. If you can no longer stomach the direction that the so-called woke Democratic Party ideologues are taking our country, then I invite you to join me.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think you should be the one to be able to decide when to pull the trigger?
No, sir.
Isn't that what this is about? If you adopt the position that any time you are denied, your particular, there's 4 groups out there and inspectors, you're the group you headed, anytime you are denied, that ipso facto requires the United States and the Security Council to act on what they said they would do, which is to use whatever means necessary to take on Saddam Hussein so you can get into that particular facility. Is that not correct? Is that not your position?
Mr. Senator, I have a job to do, or I had a job to do, and that was to disarm Iraq in accordance with the provisions of relevant resolutions.
With all due respect, I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm trying to get this as clear as I can. I really mean this now. You have an absolute logic. You put together a very tight syllogism here. You have indicated that your job is to disarm. The only way you can disarm is to have access. The only way you can have access is either with permission on the part of Iraq, or if denied, forced access, right?
Compelled access.
Compelled. Well, okay, compelled. You sound like the lawyer and I sound like the military guy. I mean, compelled, where I come from, when my old man said you're compelled, it meant I was forced. I mean, it was a real simple proposition. It wasn't much to debate. Now, there is a clear logic to that. And that's what I mean when I say I respect your position. But that means that whenever you choose a target that warrants inspection and you are denied, that ipso facto, at that moment, the only way your position can be satisfied or sustained is if the UN Security Council or the United States, acting unilaterally, uses force to guarantee access. Is not that true?
Yes, sir.
Now, that means that you get to choose the time and place when we would use force, if we use force.
No, sir.
Of course you do. If you choose the site and it's denied.
And we coordinate with the member states to include the United States.
Exactly.
And prior to us going in, we have their agreement that this indeed is an inspection worth doing.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The majors' assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone, or to take the nation to war partway, or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip, because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector. You didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Scott, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of, you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
Well, one of the four principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories. For example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Time, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he'd gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Time. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims, and then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbunda women who supposedly had been their victims.
But these were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort of totally false propaganda.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Hey, everybody. Welcome into Redacted on this Thursday. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natali Morris.
So glad to have you here. We've got a very busy show for you on this Thursday. Max Blumenthal is going to be here joining us. We're going to be diving deep into what the BBC News is planning to do with disinformation. They've launched a new disinformation department. So, and these people have actively tried to smear the gray zone. So Max Blumenthal will be here to talk about that.
Plus, we're going to talk about Ukraine, an update on the war. Officials in the Ukrainian military have said they are actively attacking inside of Russia and trying to take out Vladimir Putin, even though earlier in the week, Joe Biden was assured by President Zelensky that Ukraine would not use those weapons to launch inside of Russia. I guess it wasn't a real pinky promise.
Right.
Like, so I think you need a spit or something, like make it a different kind of promise.
Yeah, I guess so. Also, in Australia, men can now breastfeed. That's right. If it's official, men in Australia can officially breastfeed. So
and it's illegal for us to say that they can't.
So it's hurt feelings is now illegal. Like
it's not hurt feelings. It's if we say that on Twitter now, the Australian government will ask Twitter to remove it because it's against the law. It's against the law to say men can't breastfeed.
Get your clown world emojis going, fired up in the chat room tonight because Redacted starts right now. Welcome in, everyone, to Redacted on this Thursday. So glad to have all of you here. My wife is Natali, and she is not feeling well, and she is sick. So if you hear some sniffing and
I don't know
allergies,
if I'm sick or if it's allergies, but I got the sexy voice, and so I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm going to try not to do that in the microphone, and I'm just going to hold it together.
Happy birthday, Mr. President, for us?
No, I won't be doing that. No. But I know we've been talking about for several weeks now, the pollen level has been so high. And I have bees. It's not a euphemism for anything. I have actual beehives, but they haven't started producing any honey yet, and so I'm not inoculated with that pollen yet.
Oh, our brother-in-law said there's tons of honey in the thing. You should go check it out.
We can't take it.
He did the other day, and he was like, and he tasted it.
No, he was eating the comb that broke off from the roof. You can't actually take from the hive box. That's theirs for the winter. If you do, you're an animal. You really should not do that.
All right.
That's why we put a honey box on top of it, and they haven't produced honey that we can have yet. Anyway, I appreciate all the concern. I want to empathize with the rest of you who are suffering allergies this spring.
All right. We've got a daily newsletter. We'd love for you to all subscribe to it. It's totally free. Tomorrow is our last newsletter of the week. We do it Monday through Friday, so be sure to grab it. It's totally free. You just put in, just go to redacted.inc and then just put in your email address, and then you'll receive a welcome email. You have to verify your email though. So because Gmail has labeled us as dangerous. Because I love that they think that our newsletter is dangerous because they don't want you to have this information. So we cover like 4 or 5 stories that the mainstream media largely ignores. That's what the newsletter is every morning. And you can read it over your cup of coffee, kick off your morning a little bit, have some laughs, and be more informed before you head out the door. So redacted.inc, just sign up. It's totally free. We don't sell your email address or anything like that. It's only for the newsletter. Again, just go to that website, not .com, it's .inc. and put in your information. All right. And by the way, if you do subscribe, like Sunny Ray, just subscribe to the show. If you subscribe here on YouTube or Rumble, your name will pop up on the big screen. So please subscribe to the channel and turn on that little bell notification so you'll be reminded when we go live here every day. So thank you. And good to see all of you in the chat room tonight. Good to see Vincent Boyle from Belfast, UK. Let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. Let us know what city, state, country. That's the other thing I was thinking. City,
planet.
state, country, planet. What planet are you
Solar
from?
system.
Solar system.
County, area code.
Yes. Give us your home address. No, don't do that. Please don't do that. All right. All right. Let's talk about the war tonight because we've got a couple of components. I want to talk about Iraq as well as what's happening in Ukraine. So we just learned officially from the Ukrainian government, from the Ukrainian intelligence team, that they in fact are actively trying to kill Vladimir Putin. Here's the Daily Beast version of this. This came from a German newspaper, the Welt. Ukrainian spy boss bluntly admits plan to assassinate Putin. So let's just go through this piece a little bit here because it's fascinating. They admit, or they say, they're getting much, much closer to him. The second in command of the Ukrainian military intelligence says Kiev spies are actively trying to kill Vladimir Putin, and the Russian leader is well aware of it. Of course he's well aware of it, right? Wagner Zkibitsky, the head of Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, made the admission in an interview with the German publication, says Putin is noticing that we are getting closer and closer to him. But he's also afraid of being killed by his own people, Zkibitsky says. And that the assassination of Putin, he says, is our top priority. That's their number one priority. Many people in Russia still support this special military operation against Ukraine. But thanks to social media and phone checks, we know that so many Russians have died now that it scares people, he said. He said similar plans were in works for the Wagner Group, the founder of the Wagner Group, Prigozhin, whose mercenaries have been accused of grisly war crimes against Ukrainian troops, he says. Our priority is to eliminate the unit commander who orders his men to attack, he said. Asked about Kyiv's relationships with Prigozhin, Zkibitsky said bluntly, we are trying to kill him also. So we're actively trying to kill Putin. We're actively trying to kill Prigozhin of the Wagner Group, of course. As for who tops Ukraine's hit list, he said Putin is number one because he coordinates and decides what happens. But in the end, everyone will have to answer for their actions, he says. And they planned, they're going to go right after them.
Russian Parliament voted for the invasion of Ukraine. It was not a personal decision on behalf of Vladimir Putin. So that's wrong.
Right.
That's a misinformation.
Yeah, that is accurate.
He pooped out a misinformation.
Yeah, that's true. And then, of course, Zelensky has said in recent interviews that if Putin dies, there will be no war, saying that, yes, taking out Putin is the top priority. But he kind of lies out of both sides of his mouth, or he talks out of both sides of his mouth because, he did say, of course, just a few weeks ago that, no, we're not attacking Putin. We're not trying to kill Putin. But here he is admitting if Putin dies, there will be no war. That's what he told David Letterman in that interview.
Okay.
What?
Again, Russian military now is in control of the Donbass. They're not going to be like, oh, Putin, is no longer alive. We'll just pick up and leave here. Right. There is now infrastructure in those places. They're not fighting beyond those borders as far as we can tell. Maybe they are. We don't know that, right? We don't have any confirmation of that. But where they are at this point. So then what? He's not saying we need to play it out. Does that mean then they automatically revert to Ukrainian ownership, those regions?
That's what they think. I think they think that.
How could that be?
But of course, and there's a lot of people that believe that if Putin's eliminated, it'll actually become more of a hard line. Conservatives might see an opportunity to really, even take maybe more control of the government. So they might get the worst outcome if they want to take out Putin. But this is what they're saying. But it's not just Zelensky, like David just mentioned. It's the United States that actively wants this as well, right? We've heard multiple senators saying that this is a top priority. Here's Senator Lindsey Graham calling for the removal of Putin.
So President Biden, you're the Rodney Dangerfield of world leaders. Nobody respects you. And if you don't change your game and up your game, we're going to have World War III. Here's the next war that's coming. Israel is going to have to take military action to stop the Iranians from developing enriched uranium to the point it can become a weapon. They're at 84%. All they have to do is get to 90%. And we're not doing a damn thing about the Iranians trying to develop a nuclear bomb under our plain sight.
I would like to know, we know that Russian drones are flying over Ukraine. Yeah. Why don't we shoot down 2 of theirs and send a message? You shoot down 1 of ours, we'll shoot down 2 the first time, 10 the next time.
We're being walked on, we're being crapped on, and we're about to have a major war because China is sizing up Biden, and they're going to go into Taiwan if we don't up our game in Ukraine. Biden's always late to the game. He's late to give them tanks.
Senator.
Yeah. So it's amazing to hear these guys. Like literally, let's go in and assassinate another a leader of Russia. Let's do that. That's exactly what Senator Graham is calling for.
I mean, it's a long-standing precedent. I believe it's actually even a war crime to target military leadership, because they've known for centuries that if you take out the leadership, then the armies will just run rampant. It's a very dangerous thing to just take out military leadership in war.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that.
It's
never a smart move. Yeah, and so but they don't get that, and these media types don't get that. And like warmonger Sean Hannity, who's vying as much as he can right now for Tucker Carlson's job. But he, it's amazing to go of like Tucker Carlson, who's anti-war, to somebody who's absolutely pro-war and wants us to eliminate Vladimir Putin, wants us regime change is what he's calling for. Listen.
Russia and Putin's hostility and aggression against our country, the United States, has now reached a dangerous new height. Now, tonight, the question is this. What will your President Joe Biden do? Is he going to offer maybe another waiver for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline? Put more sanctions in place? Putin's not going to care, because he's selling his energy and getting filthy rich. He's selling it to China, the rest of the world. And all of this comes as a new axis of evil is emerging between these three top geopolitical foes. China's dictator Xi is now scheduled to hold a very rare but significant meeting with Putin in Moscow. So how much you want to bet they'll probably be trading jokes about just how pathetically weak America's president is? This is beyond embarrassing. This is danger to the safety and security of the entire world.
Yeah, so eliminate Putin is what the mainstream media wants and what the United States government wants. Meanwhile, we're learning this morning from the New York Times that, in fact, Ukrainians were likely behind the Kremlin drone attack, which, of course, we knew right from the get-go that this was NATO and Ukraine operation to attack the Kremlin, to try to hit Putin. But now we've gotten word from the New York Times, which is kind of a laughable piece, actually, from the New York Times, to go through and say that Ukrainians were likely behind the Kremlin drone attack. American spy agencies, though, don't know exactly who carried out the attack. Right. Okay. American spy agencies have no idea who carried out the attack. Yes, they do. But they suggest it was part of a series of covert operations orchestrated by Ukraine's security services.
Okay. So that's a big fat maybe.
Right.
That's like the COVID lab leak. They gave this like moderate, and moderate to severe arthritis, moderate to severe
ulcerative
certainty
colitis
is what they're saying. Low certainty. So we're at medium certainty on Ukraine.
I mean, you don't know. Of course you know. You were actively involved in it. American spy agencies don't know exactly who carried out the attack, but Ukrainians were likely behind it. You know exactly. This is like Nord Stream all over again. You don't know. Okay, sure you don't know. U.S. officials said the drone attack on the Kremlin earlier this month was likely orchestrated by one of Ukraine's special military or intelligence units that we don't even know. We don't even have them on speed dial, so we don't even know who these people are. We're not actively running these intelligence units and feeding them specific information about specific targets every second of the day.
Because last I checked, they didn't have enough weaponry to defend their own country. Now they have enough to go abroad, and we don't know. We don't know where it goes. We're not interested. We don't have a hotline.
We don't have any kind of connection. We know that they speak. We are literally running their intelligence operation. So the fact that we don't know is absolutely laughable. Just like when they launched that missile into Poland, and we knew immediately that it wasn't the Russians who struck Poland. It was Ukraine that launched a missile that hit Poland. We knew exactly, immediately, and the Pentagon immediately knew who was responsible for it.
And that hit like a field, like farmers in a field, right? Yeah. So this hit a busy metropolitan center, a world capital.
The Kremlin.
Right. And so, like, you'd think that would be a little bit easier than a farm.
They know the agencies reached their preliminary assessment in part through intercepted communications in which Russian officials blamed Ukraine. Really? That's how you came to that conclusion? That they intercepted communication with Russian officials who blamed Ukraine?
Okay.
That's how our intelligence agencies figured it out. Are you full of garbage?
They also said that publicly.
Yeah.
Which interception was it Sputnik?
And what freaking phone call are Russians having where they're like, the Kremlin was just hit. We think it was the Ukrainians. Anybody in Russia is going to assume that that's the case. Who else is attacking the Kremlin at this point? I mean,
Right. Sorry.
You all right?
Yeah, just reaching for tissue.
All right. So U.S. officials say their level of confidence that the Ukrainian government directly authorized the Kremlin drone attack is low, but that that is because intelligence agencies do not yet have specific evidence identifying which government officials, Ukrainian units, or operatives were involved. So their direct confidence that the Ukrainian government directly authorized the Kremlin attack is low. Oh, it's low because we just couldn't figure it out yet.
Probably the paragraph that said, the New York Times asked them, did you ask Ukraine? And they said no.
I mean, this is the New York Times. This is literally supposed to be the paper of record in the United States. This is a sad, sad display. Like, this is what the United States is sunk to at this point. The New York Times. This is awful, awful garbage. Really, really terrible. So, but Zelensky lied right to our faces about it because, remember, apparently Ukraine wasn't involved at all about attacking the Kremlin or Putin. And he told us right to our faces. Listen.
We don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our territory. We are defending our villages and cities. We don't have, enough weapon for this. That's why we don't use it anywhere. For us, that is the deficit. We can't spend it. And we didn't attack Putin. We leave it to tribunal.
Yeah, okay. So they didn't do it. They didn't do it.
The head of your military said you did.
Apparently not.
Okay.
So I want to...
I'll say different words.
Let's turn our attention to Iraq now, because we're getting word that the United States is now actively considering a brand new military base in Iraq, specifically in the oil-rich regions, according to sources this morning. The media suggesting that the United States chose Al Jazeera area to construct its military base due to its large oil and gas fields, according to these sources. Now, the United States is apparently monitoring widely one of the western regions of Iraq's Al Anbar province to build its second military base in the province. And this is where Iraqi security apparently revealed this, because local media sources were saying, well, this is what's happening now. And the media suggested that the U.S. chose this spot to construct its military bases due to its large oil and gas fields, as well as all of its other mines that are nearby. But of course, so weren't we supposed to be gone? Wasn't that the idea that the Iraq war is over, that we are home?
Which
we've come
one?
Home?
We've had 3.
But no, of course we never left. As we pointed out on this show before, we've never left, right?
In a country we were never supposed to invade in the first place.
No.
And we invaded based on a lie in the first place. Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
We invade and kill millions of people in their country for a lie, over a lie, that they had anything to do with 9/11. And we absolutely know that wasn't the case.
Oh, that's the second time you're talking about Iraq War
I can't
II.
keep track of them.
Okay.
I just can't keep track
The
of them.
first one was also based on a lie.
Right. Oh, yeah. The first one was based on a lie.
Troops along the border of Kuwait was a lie.
Babies in incubators.
Yes.
Out of it. Yeah. The whole thing. Right.
Yes.
Lie. So according to reports, the area is one of Iraq's completely safe regions and has not witnessed any attacks for a long time. So that's why they chose this. But of course, they also chose it for the massive amount of oil, the massive amount of mines that are there, and the minerals that are there. An expert on Iraq security issues had previously pointed out that the continued presence of the U.S. occupation troops in Iraq is aimed at supporting Washington's interests and backing terrorism. So what's amazing about this is we got sources that told us directly that they have been recently deployed. And I've heard this from other sources as well, that troops have been called up and are being actively deployed to Iraq as late as
recently as February
and March of this year. So new American troops heading to Iraq for the purposes of either staffing up this new military base or sort of forward operations in order to be there ahead of time.
Yeah.
But this is incredibly troubling. Why are we going back to Iraq? Why are we stepping up our position in Iraq? For oil? For minerals? So that's why we're going to put American soldiers in harm's way. We're going to take Americans and put them in a military base in Iraq, a country we do not belong, have killed millions of people, and we're going to go there so that we can exploit their oil and their minerals.
Presumably.
I mean, what else? What other reason is there?
To maybe thwart Russian interference or Russian influence in that region, to thwart Chinese influence in that region, to thwart Arab nationalistic
Iranian influence in that region.
Definitely. Or to I'm not sure. There's a lot of different reasons.
Well, we've already been staffing up in Iraq anyway and stealing Syria's oil and then funneling it into Iraq, where then we exploit it for ourselves in the United States. So it's already been a big staging ground for what we steal out of Syria and these other spots, and then funnel it through Iraq. But it's of course worth noting that most of the weapons that we left, I mean, tens of billions of dollars in weapons in Afghanistan, and tens of billions of dollars have gone into Ukraine in weaponry. And many of these weapons are showing up in Iraq. They're showing up in Afghanistan. They're showing up in Africa. So they're showing up in the exact places that we then are putting new military outposts. We're building new military outposts in Syria and Yemen and Africa and in Iraq. Why? To combat terrorists. The very terrorists that we fund. We basically hand them our weapons. We turn them over to them and give them these weapons. And then we start another war. Or we put more Americans in harm's way because of this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then we also have the nerve to say, and they stole the weapons. They went on our base and they stole the weapons. So then there's the narrative that people get behind, like, oh, they stole them. We need to go after them.
Yeah. So they stole them, now that we have to go after them, and that it keeps the cycle going, right? And then the military makes more money. The military makes more money and continues this vicious cycle of us funneling weapons in, and then the military-industrial complex making all kinds of money on this.
Yeah, so we'll have to keep an eye on that because this is a sequel that we do not want to see, is another Iraq war.
Well, and we don't need another military base. We just last night on the show talked about the 754 military bases we have around the world. Now we're going to build a second one in Iraq. This is exactly what anyway, again, this is why they attack us. Like, you want to know why they end up,
absolutely.
This is exactly why they attack us. This is, say what you want about anything, but Osama bin Laden specifically said, because we were building a military base in Saudi Arabia, that's why they wanted to attack us.
Yes. And did you know that the nightclub shooting in Orlando, that person had cried out when he had hostages saying, I'm doing this here because I am tired of seeing all of the women and children being bombed in my home country.
And he
was a Middle Eastern, I can't remember off the top of my head. I want to say he was Libyan or Syrian. I'm sorry, this fact escapes me. But when people who were held hostage by him told this to the media, they ignored that and instead went with the narrative that he was some kind of closeted homosexual who was sort of anti-gay. He wasn't actually. He had said that, he had aimed for Disneyland, but there was too much security, so he just chose a random bar. Now, of course, that's not an excuse. That's absolutely terrible. But that is the rally cry that rallies up people in those regions when they just can't stand seeing their country, their villages, women and children bombed, starving, terrorized. It becomes a recruitment tool for Al-Qaeda and their spin-off societies.
Yeah, and then the media ignored that part of the story.
Absolutely, they did. They just made it to seem like a gay hate crime, and it wasn't. The guy was married. He didn't know what he was going into, and he was screaming about, like, this happens to us, And again, I'm not saying that nobody deserves that, but this is a narrative that we as Americans deserve to hear, so that maybe we could say, we absolutely don't want to be doing that. We don't want that to happen here, and we don't want that to happen there. We want not here, not there, nowhere. Sam, I am.
Someone in our chat, Donald Thomas says he lived near my house. Wow. That's amazing. Oh, he
bomber,
was
or the shooter.
Parabellum Prepper says he was Afghani. Was he
Afghan, possibly. I can look it up quickly if you'd like me to.
That's right. Anyway, we're going to keep our eye on this Iraq story because it's incredibly troubling. Anyway, we've got more news to get to here on the show. We're going to talk about this BBC disinformation plan with their new disinformation board. We're going to also look at why it's now legal. You can absolutely, men, if you want to breastfeed in Australia, yeah, they're saying go ahead, men. Men. What is happening in this world? Australia, what in the heck is happening?
And women, don't you even try to say that they can't, or that's illegal. You're breaking the law. And I think that man was Pakistani.
Okay. Well, we've named about 7 different Middle Eastern countries at this point. It's like the Wheel of Fortune. Okay. And we're also going to look at the recession in Germany. Germany is officially in a recession. We've got the word on that and what that means and why it's all a man-made crisis. But first, if you know someone that struggled with acid reflux, they've been unable to sleep, or they've got, shoulder pain, the 2 things that really keep people up at night: shoulder pain, neck pain. You have to try the Medcline 3-component shoulder relief sleep system. It is unbelievable. Yes, Medcline is the company name. And there's a link right there on your screen. I want you to go check it out. Medcline.com/redacted. And you'll get 20% off when you buy from them if you support Redacted. But I just want you to see what this is. This isn't just like a sleep system or a sleep pillow. It is actually 2 systems that provide relief for acid reflux or shoulder pain. And what's amazing is it is really a medical device. It is a medical device. It's not just a pillow. 2 systems that provide relief. You sleep on your side and you go to sleep. It's that simple. Whether you suffer from painful nighttime acid reflux, shoulder pain, or both, the Medcline patented pillow system is designed to cushion your body in a sleeping position that's supremely comfortable. And see, here's how it works. You actually, it creates like a pocket where you slide your arm underneath and the shoulder pain is gone. It's unbelievable. That's been my experience. And this is how we sleep every night. You put your arm through that like a little thing. It's got a little nugget of a pillow, and you can position it however you want. You have the long pillow that goes between your legs, and it's fantastic. Medcline sleep systems are not just foam wedges. They are true medical devices, FDA registered, doctor recommended, clinically proven to provide relief. The patented arm pocket allows for comfortable side sleeping the entire night. You're enveloped in side sleeping comfort. The Medcline relief system is proven to reduce exposure to harmful stomach and acid 87% better than a bed wedge. So right now, put an end to your nighttime discomfort. Just try it. I absolutely love it. I want you to get 20% off right now. When you go to medcline.com/redacted, get 20% off and a better night's sleep today at medcline.com/redacted. 20% off at medcline.com/redacted. Well, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, the bastion of journalism, is going to make us all aware about all of the misinformation and disinformation that is being fed to us on a daily basis. The BBC is now going to lead the charge on this. They've set up a new verified department at the BBC so you can trust what they say, and they will keep disinformation away from you. Here was the announcement from Mariana Spring. She made the announcement in the BBC's newsroom. Take a look.
We are a team of investigative journalists here at the BBC. We are also a new brand, and we are a physical location above the newsroom in London. And the point of the team, as you said, is to verify video, to fact check, to counter disinformation, and to analyse really complex stories so we can get to the truth of what's going on. Why does this matter? Well, mistruths can cause really serious harm to society and to the people in them. And so we want to show you our workings and really help you understand how we get to the bottom of what's happening. I have some undercover accounts that I've set up for the BBC's Americast podcast, and we use these kinds of undercover accounts, and these are the characters that the accounts belong to. to be able to really understand polarization online and how what's happening on our social media feeds and what we're being recommended and pushed to us can affect all of us. And they don't offer us a totally exhaustive insight into what's going on, but they can help us understand just how social media works.
Meanwhile, the excellent journalist, founder of the Gray Zone, Max Blumenthal, has been all over this story, calling out the hypocrisy of Mariana Spring and the BBC's Verify program, this move to try to keep us away from disinformation. And Max Blumenthal joins us now from the Gray Zone. Max, good to see you.
Good to see you, Clayton.
And welcome back to the show. So when this announcement was made, what was your first response? Because there's a sordid relationship between the BBC or Mariana Spring specifically and the Gray Zone. What was your first thought on this?
Well, I'd learned about Mariana Spring from various intelligence-linked plots to discredit and simply destroy alternative independent media outlets like ours that we'd exposed in the past. And so I wasn't shocked to see her, the BBC's first so-called disinformation reporter, gain this new show which exists above the BBC's actual newsroom, as if she towers over it. It's obviously a special initiative, and maybe many of the people toiling down there in their cubicles don't quite understand what it is. But to me, it looks like the use of the BBC to house an intelligence operation that's aimed at furthering the objectives of British foreign policy and also, state policy toward dissidents. Mariana Spring is sort of a censorious personality. She, back in 2020, I think it was, she created a series of fake accounts that, quote unquote, engaged with hateful content in Facebook and Instagram forums. And the point of this was to increase state monitoring and pressure on Facebook to censor more. And she claimed that these accounts, while engaging with misogynistic hate, were then recommended more misogynistic content. She never really explains what the hate was or what qualifies hate. And she said she was triggered to do this project or motivated to do it because she herself encountered misogynistic hate online. She then moved on to target the anti-lockdown protests across Europe and serially and wildly misrepresented the size of these protests to paint them as a handful of isolated extremists. She participated in panels that we exposed as actually state-sponsored initiatives that were claiming to counter COVID-19 misinformation. These were covertly backed by the British Culture Ministry through the Royal Institute run by then Prince Charles, now King Charles, and involved using online influencers to attack and supposedly de-radicalize people who questioned the COVID-19 restrictions, which we now understand, that the critics and the skeptics got it right. But the point here is that Mariana Spring was always cropping up whenever the British state needed someone to advance censorious initiatives. And, then, of course, she turns up in leaked emails that we exclusively obtained at the Gray Zone relating to a plot involving high-level intelligence operatives in the British government to attack and destroy the Gray Zone.
Yeah, let's go through those emails. And I saw a tweet where you specifically are asking Mariana Spring if she ever followed through with certain meetings. She was reached out to by, I think, British journalist Paul Mason, and a part of his plot, right, to smear investigative journalists and the likes of the team at the Gray Zone. And you asked her specifically in these leaked emails, had she ever followed through on that reply, or on whether or not she went on these meetings. It doesn't look like she replied to you, but do you have any evidence or any knowledge that she did then meet with these individuals? And why her? Why were they reaching out to her?
Well, this all relates to one of the biggest stories we've ever broken at the Gray Zone, which is that Paul Mason, who is one of the most famous supposedly left-wing journalists in the UK, who presented himself as sort of the media liaison to the Jeremy Corbyn leadership campaign in Labour, was actually a state security collaborator who was working with a figure in the British Foreign Office, Andy Price, whose job it was to promote state propaganda under the guise of independent media and to take down media that challenged British foreign policy. So Paul Mason didn't like us and targeted us. It wasn't that he didn't like us. He obsessively hated us because we were tearing to shreds the propaganda around the Ukraine proxy war and NATO's expansion. And we were going at him online after he denounced us. And so he went to his buddy, Andy Price, who is this major information warrior in the British government, the British Foreign Office. I would say he's close. He's an intelligence officer. And he said, let's get a meeting together of all of the people we work with in media and have an anti-Gray Zone summit and take down the Gray Zone. And we'll start by having Twitter list them. This is when Twitter was under its old regime, list them as a Russian state affiliated website, even though we have no connection to Russia, never did, financially or otherwise. And he said, let's invite Mariana Spring from the BBC. It wasn't him, it was another intelligence operative named Emil Khan, said, let's invite Mariana Spring from the BBC. And I remembered this when her BBC Verify project just launched this week, that she was suggested to participate in the attack on the Gray Zone. So I asked her, did you ever go to this meeting? And what exactly is your relationship with the British intelligence services like? Of course, there was no response from her. Guess what her response was? I am being bombarded with hate and misogyny, and this hate must be condemned, and that's why we need this project. It's like any criticism of me is literal violence, and I'm not going to respond to legitimate criticism and real questions that the public has about my journalistic credibility.
Right. It's like Nina Jankowicz 2.0, the Misinformation Governance Board from the Department of Homeland Security. Didn't they learn their lesson? So, yeah. So she responds with, I'm being bombarded with abuse, misogyny, defamatory claims, misunderstanding my investigations into harm caused by mistruths and trolling. The harm that's been caused by mistruths. She specifically talks about going after conspiracy theories and mistruths. Do we know what these conspiracy theories are? Because as it related to COVID, all of the stuff that she was apparently against has all come true. And I would love to know specifically what these mistruths and conspiracy theories are. Do you have any insight into that?
As usual, she doesn't say. Conspiracy theory is a completely subjective term that is most frequently used by the NATO, people connected to the NATO or financial establishment in the collective West, as a stand-in for any discussion or debate that they want to isolate, censor, or silence because it contravenes or interrupts their objectives. It's the same term they use for they use disinformation interchangeably with conspiracy theories. And so much of what they call disinformation often turns out to be true or contains grains of truth which demand a more serious and direct public debate. And the public senses that they're using censorship instead of debate because they can't actually engage directly with these ideas that are so threatening to them, and that they're using democracy, liberal democracy, as a false veneer, a patina for an autocratic regime. Whereas, you have countries like China or Russia, which will just outright censor on the grounds of national security. But in the West, they have to maintain the veneer of liberal democracy. So they bring in figures like Mariana Spring or Nina Jankowicz to create the momentum for the state to come in and then start removing accounts. And then where do they do it? They do it in our new digital commons, which is which are these privately owned outlets controlled by Silicon Valley oligarchs. And it all depends on the relationship between those oligarchs and the state. And that's why they're so frustrated about Twitter, because Elon Musk has said, I don't want any relationship with the Biden administration. I don't like them. I want an alternative regime. And so they have to destroy his platform because they can't do what they did with the old Twitter leadership, which is to just say, hey, we're just going to pal around with you, give you some favors, and you censor the accounts that we want. And we know now through the Twitter files or through the lawsuit by the Missouri Attorney General that Twitter was taking direction from the Biden White House on which accounts to censor, including like an Anthony Fauci parody account. So Mariana Spring is just taking this to the next level. The next level is going after Twitter as an entire platform.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. Well, I know I'll be tuning into the BBC to get all of my truthful news going forward. The Disinformation Verify program. We'll be watching it closely. And we'll see how long it lasts, actually, see if the BBC pulls the plug sooner, just as quickly as the Department of Homeland Security did with the Nina Jankowicz program.
I'm glad you raised that question, Clayton, because I don't think it's going to last that long. The public is up in arms.
Yeah, it seems like I can't imagine that this lasts longer than the weekend, but maybe I'll be shocked. I'll be shocked next week if it's still around and if Mariana still has her high, lofty job at the BBC above the newsroom. One website that I read every day, it's a must-read website. One of the really the standard in journalism is The Gray Zone. I encourage all of you to subscribe. Make sure you go over and support independent journalism and what the team at The Gray Zone does. Max Blumenthal, great to see you as always.
Thanks a lot, Clayton.
And
I really wish that these news organizations like the BBC would work more on information than disinformation.
It's amazing.
Maybe that's your job.
When I first saw this story, it reminded me of back when, do you guys remember this, Philip, David? Do you guys remember, and let me know in the chat room if you remember this too, back in the day when social media kind of burst onto the scene, right? Twitter just started and people were trying to, and all these newsrooms like CNN and everything, they were trying to figure out like how to have like Twitter incorporated into their broadcasts. So they started hiring social media correspondents, and they would like we're going to check in now with Sally. She's in our social media studio. Like, what are people saying about what we're talking about?
I did that during the 2008 election on CBS News.
They made you do that? Oh
I did that for the 2008 Obama election. Yeah.
Yeah, but it just reminds me.
On the CBS
It just reminds me of
this.
Yeah.
You'd get like written articles that were just entirely tweets, and they're like the only thing that the author actually put in there was like, and then such and such said, and then just like endless tweets.
Worst. It was the worst. And now this, right? So now this is the new thing from these newsrooms. It's like Brian Stelter at CNN. It's like reliable sources, and we're going to have this disinformation department inside each of these newsrooms now. Like Fox News, we learned a good chunk of their investigative unit was just fired. So according to reports, and I think the New York Daily News then confirmed at least a portion of it, or Fox said, well, it wasn't the whole department, but so they're getting rid of like their good journalists, like investigative journalism, right? In favor of, now this is the kind of stuff we're seeing like at the BBC.
Of government narrative.
Yeah, like now we're going to have a disinformation department. Maybe Fox will fire those people, and then they're going to have, maybe they will, maybe they won't. They'll have their own disinformation team that's going to be like in charge of stories. I don't know.
Perhaps, I don't know, but I feel like because the word conspiracy has lost a lot of its weight, given that a lot of the conspiracy theories around COVID ended up to be real conspiracies, and that continues to happen time after time, that people don't, they can't hit at each other quite so much anymore with this word.
Right.
And
You're
so
like,
misinformation.
You're just a conspiracy theorist about COVID, people said to us here like 3 years ago, 2 years ago. And then all of it came true?
Yeah.
So then we're like, okay, thank you. Then thank you for calling me that. I'm glad that you want to call me names. That's fine. Anyway, I just love this. It's so funny. How long do you guys think that this lasts at the BBC, the disinformation department? And how long do you think that she has a job? Let us know in the chat. What do you think?
Wonder, do people say these things to you in your life? Like, oh, that's misinformation. Because if someone said that to me, I would laugh in their face and be like, no, let's talk about the merits of what we're talking about. Let's not use these throwaway terms like conspiracy and disinformation.
Like you got into
Those are propaganda terms.
Like you got into a debate with a friend of yours back and forth over text messages. Anyway, I won't go into the details of it, but you had a conversation back and forth.
Yeah.
Right. And
it was respectful.
But yeah, if someone were to come up and be like, that's misinformation, and you can just label somebody that, and then it shuts down conversation. Like it's
basically, it's basically the conversation that Crystal Ball had with RFK. Like that is disinformation, fighting information. They don't want any information from the person or any details. It's just, no, that's misinformation. That's disinformation.
Yeah, I just have such a problem with that word, and I refuse to use it because there's nowhere that says information has to be true. Information has to be consumed and then processed, and then we decide if it's true or not. Information by itself is not necessarily true. And so to add a dis or a miss is it's unnecessary.
And don't forget mal.
Yeah. And malinformation. I don't like that one either.
Malinformation, dis, and miss.
I don't use those words. I don't use those throwaway words that I think shut down conversation. I will never say
you're a racist,
conspiracy theorist. I will never say misinformation, and I will never say anti-vaxxer either.
And I will never say you're a racist.
Yeah, but if
can
I point out you just said all those?
Okay.
But if I can't just like call your argument disinformation, then that means I have to have a counter argument and evidence, and that's hard work.
Yeah.
To do that.
Right. It's easier just to use one word. You're a racist. And then, wow, man, you really told that person. Yeah, I did. Now I don't have to debate that person.
Right.
All right, we've got more news to get to here on the show. We're going to talk about you can breastfeed now in Australia. And it's unbelievable. And we're also going to talk about the recession hitting Germany because it's official, guys. Europe's largest economy is now officially in recession, and it's all because of man-made stupid climate decisions and sanctions against Russia, among other things. But this is all man-made, and so Europe's largest economy going down the toilet. What will it mean for the rest of the world? What will it mean for the rest of Europe? This is a big, big story that we're going to get to.
All right. Well, we're going to first talk about breastfeeding in Australia and how it is now illegal in Australia to say that men cannot breastfeed or should not breastfeed.
So if I say that in Australia, if I go there on I don't know.
Well, it doesn't seem like there is actually a law on the books, but what we're going to talk about is two women in Australia. One's a lactation consultant and the other one is a women advocate and a head of a women's advocacy group. Both of them wrote something on Twitter saying that men can't breastfeed, and they received notices from Twitter saying you were in violation of the law. In violation of the law, saying that men can't breastfeed.
Violation of the Australian law.
And so those tweets, because I am not in Australia, those tweets are available for me to see, but they are unavailable inside of Australia. And Twitter said, okay, we'll take those down and we'll let that person know that we can't show these tweets in Australia. I'm going to show you the tweets in question. I'm going to show you the notices from Twitter, and you decide for yourself if there actually is a law that says that we must speak this untruth, that men can breastfeed. I refuse to say that. And so I'm going to say as much on this platform, and we'll see how far it goes. Okay, so today we're going to talk about 3 women being punished for saying things that hurt men's feelings because the men are saying they're women and their feelings are more important. 2 English-speaking countries, 2 crazy stories where we're pretending it was women whose feelings were hurt by real women. The truth is that it's men whose feelings are hurt by, they say, these women. Here's the first one. First to England. She is a woman of color. This is Baroness Kishwar Faulkner. She's Pakistani. And she's being investigated, and they're calling for her firing. She heads the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and people are asking for her to be fired because they say she used the term bloke in lipstick. That's now trending on Twitter, where people who are gender critical are calling out other people for dressing in woman face and saying that's a bloke in lipstick. So it's become a whole thing, right? This person, Emma Laslett, is the lipstick wearer in question. Emma Laslett is a biological male and calling for the removal of a woman of color for not respecting Laslett's womanhood. Watch.
if your job is to protect people from discrimination, and while on duty and in front of everybody else who's doing that, you are peddling that kind of discrimination, then you're not fit for the job and honestly shouldn't be doing it anymore.
Okay, I noticed that Emma Laslett did not wear lipstick in that interview, and I have to think that that's purposeful. Some say Baroness Wagner didn't actually say that about Emma Laslett, but rather said it as something people say. She just used the expression in meetings, as in people say these things. She says she can prove it, and she is ready to participate in this investigation, and she's ready to go because she thinks she's being witch hunted. Still, in response to this, trans activists did this. What they're doing is taking bottles of piss and trying to vandalize the Human Rights Commission building. That really ought to show them. Now, most likely this bloke in lipstick thing is a distraction from what Baroness Faulkner's real crime is, and that is that she wants to change the legal definition of sex to include biological sex. And that's where she became trans enemy number one, because, trans activists have already co-opted the term gender. They want sex too. Here's an article about this. And in her argument, she was asked to respond to the gender recognition bill. And she wrote what I think was a very rational letter, not at all transphobic. What she's saying here is that, there is no straightforward balance, but we have come to the view that sex is defined as biological sex for the purposes of the Equality Act. And this would bring greater legal clarity in 8 areas. She talks about sports, homosexual spaces, sex discrimination, equal pay. She also makes this point that if a trans person who's a biological woman then goes and legally changes her sex to male, she loses the protection of pregnancy and maternity, unless we change those definitions too, which I'm sure trans rights activists want to do. This is why they're after her, not just because she said bloke in lipstick. They want her entire commission decommissioned because she wrote this report. And they say that she has fostered this community of abuse, that she's abusive, and that she, is transphobic. Over 30 LGBTQ plus charities have written a letter saying they want this commission gone. Now, I think it's worth noting here that this doesn't help trans people. Trans people are more likely on average, this is the statistics, on average to be poorer than the average citizen, and they have higher medical expenses because of the medicalization of their bodies and a higher incidence of mental health problems. So when trans organizations like this make this big stink about these kind of things, you're hurting our feelings, right? They actually make it less likely for their community to get a job. As a business owner, of course, you would think twice about the enormous liability of using the wrong speech. Like, okay, maybe I'm going to honor your pronouns, but I can't be sure that every one of my employees does. And what if one of my employees goes with their instinctual sensing of your gender and calls you the wrong gender, then I'm being sued. This tracks with a recent business.com survey that found that a resume with pronouns was less likely to get a job than one without.
Like if I'm sitting there going through a stack of resumes and I see, this person changes their pronouns, this is going to be a pain. This person, I'm sorry, is going to be a pain in the ass.
Oh, yes. And they're proving this to us, right? And so they did an experiment where they took one resume without any pronouns and the other resume said they, them. And it was all of these less likely to be called back for a job. Because someone's like, do I really want the liability? Do I want to be constantly lectured about how to speak?
Right.
Do I want to constantly be like minding my P's and Q's, knowing that I have a whole rich government organization going to come down on me if I say one wrong word?
I would also love to know the data, and maybe we could find this out someday, the difference between like hard workers, like the type of person is that the person that doesn't use pronoun switching like that is going to be like a hard worker, is going to get the job done. Or is the person who is like changing their pronouns and feels the need to lecture everyone in the office about their pronouns, are they going to be the victim? They're going to be the ones that are always taking sick days. They're never going to be there because it's always a woe is me.
We also could make the argument they are legitimately always sick because the medicines that they are taking are making them sick.
True. And mentally sick, by the way, on top of it.
Right.
Right.
Yes. And, you know, research has shown that like it keeps, because if you've blocked your puberty, you have not been able to mature. You are not going to be the best worker, the best fit for the job if you've not had because puberty is not just to be a reproductive being, it's to mature your brain, to make decisions. So it's like, do I, you know, hop off a moving car or not? Those are things that like teenagers are more likely to do and then less likely to do after puberty, right?
Right.
Anyway, again, when these communities sort of yell and scream that they're being treated the wrong way and that, you know, they want anyone who's guilty of that to be sacked, they're really doing their own communities no favors. Such as this video you may have seen of an English trans man who was fired for screaming at a woman in Starbucks for this episode.
Absolutely not. Don't ever call me transphobic. Ever. You do not know me.
You're being transphobic, Karen. Now get out.
Call me transphobic.
You are transphobic. Now get out.
I want a refund.
You're not having one. Do the police. Hi, get out.
Absolutely.
You are trespassing now.
They've got cameras.
You are trespassing.
We've
Get
got
out.
cameras.
Get out. You are trespassing.
Apparently, we said something transphobic.
You actually.
Okay, so I'm cutting the video here. It continues to go on just because sometimes we have rules about how much like aggression
Violence.
we can show on these platforms. But he goes and attacks that person and like tries to wrestle the camera away. And so that person was fired. And then also has a trickle down effect because it makes it less likely that people like that person will be hired because of this behavior. It's just not helping, right? Okay, so on to another person who is not helping. The government has asked Twitter to remove tweets from a lactation consultant for saying that men can't breastfeed. We touched on this story a few days ago. This is a man in Australia who fathered a biological son, but then now says he's a trans woman. And so he tried, this was a few years ago, to pump himself full of hormones in order to breastfeed the baby. What he did specifically is up his estrogen and took a drug called domperidone. It's an anti-nausea medication. It's not for babies. And it's known to increase your hormone level of prolactin, which can cause your breasts to swell up and make milk during and after pregnancy. It is by no means studied to do this. In fact, doctors told him not to do it. And here's what he said anyway to, I think this was the Daily Mail, saying, being a trans woman, I can't carry. It's one of the limitations of it all.
Of it all.
Right. This whole being a man
not a
thing.
Woman. One of the difficult things of being a man is that I'm not a woman.
Right.
You don't have a womb. Where's the baby going to gestate?
Oh, my God.
To know I could breastfeed my own child and have that experience, I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to know what it was like to be a mom and breastfeed. Again, it's I want, not what's wrong with the baby. Now, as someone who, again, nursed 3 babies to about 1.5 years each, I know that what I want is really irrelevant. Like, how many times did you cut my dinner? Because when we would go somewhere and my dinner would come, the baby would smell food and want to nurse. And so I would be like this, and Clayton would cut my food because it's not at all about what I want. It's not like, oh, I really want to feel the experience, although it's beautiful to nurse. That's not it. That is not getting the experience. You're not at all getting the real experience if it's just about what you want to feel. That is, I'm sorry, I'm going to say this as someone who was pretty stinking good at nursing. You're doing it wrong.
And you're selfish. Yeah,
yes.
It's all about, again, it's swimming in the lake of me. You know, it's like, what do I want? So I'm going to pump myself full of all of these drugs that are then going to go into the child.
Yeah.
Right? Or however they're going to get there. I don't know.
I mean, we can't drink coffee when we are, some women do, right? We're not supposed to drink alcohol. We're not supposed to have, like, you know, when we're pregnant, certain cheeses, frozen yogurt, although I did do the frozen yogurt, because we're worried about the baby, not about like, oh, will this be a sensual experience for me? What the heck is that? So here is Jasmine Sussex, who was a lactation consultant for 20 years. If you've ever known a lactation consultant, they are amazing ladies. I had one who helped me through a baby with tongue tie. Wouldn't have got through it without her. She was amazing. Here is the tweet that she sent saying babies can smell their mother's milk and turn towards it. This baby sleeping through his dad's sad attempt to be the mom. Like, they're not gonna latch. That's not.
I held my kids. I held my babies all the time. I would hold them, and they would snuggle up to me. Some of my greatest memories, holding my 3 little kids, and they would fall asleep in my arms.
And
it was
did
like
you
a
ever
football.
think like, I wish I could have more. Let me.
Yeah, like I'm like, you know what? While you're down there, why don't you just, you know?
Well, you're saying they never attempted to latch, like.
No, that's my point. They never would attempt to latch on me. Like I'm holding the baby like a little football, and they would just go to sleep.
No,
like
when they're teeny, they root like this on anybody. They're just like, where is it? But they're smelling around for it. There's a reason your areola gets so dark is because the contrast, they can't see. So that contrast, they're looking for the contrast. They're trying to smell. And then when they get near it, they actually open their mouth. The baby won't open their mouth for a man.
Wiley C in our chat, or Willie C in our chat says, I love the Jack avatar from Nightmare Before Christmas, says this is child cruelty. It is, or child abuse, right?
I talked about this with my sister-in-law today because she also nursed for quite a long time, all her 3 babies, and she worked in child protective services. And I was like, would you take a child away for this? Now, she lives in Pennsylvania, so she has nothing to do with Australian law. And she said, if we knew the parent was on illegal drugs, we would. But you can't go down the route of like, are some moms on antidepressants and then they're nursing? You know, that's tough. Yeah. Anyway, here is the notice that Jasmine Sussex, the lactation consultant, got from Twitter, saying that this tweet had to be taken down in Australia because of Australia's local laws, but says that content remains available elsewhere. So we can still see it. They're saying that these are the laws, and she didn't know that you can't say, oh, it's sad that the baby didn't latch on, right. That's a sad attempt. Like, what is illegal about that? She's pushing back by putting in a Freedom of Information request to the Australian E-Safety Commissioner over this suppression. She thinks that's the agency that was behind this. And she wants to know who made Twitter do this. What is the law I've broken? I want to see how this decision was made. She says, I will not be intimidated. Again, if you've ever met a lactation consultant, I wouldn't mess with them. So she doubled down on her Twitter feed today. She just posted this about fatherhood, saying fatherhood is selfless. These men who coerce their female partners into this unethical live experiment on the baby must be stopped.
Live human experiment.
Yeah, I mean, it was a human experiment on a baby.
Yeah.
For their own validation, for the validation of an ideology.
You're screwing up this baby on top of it.
The baby's now 3. They say the baby's totally fine.
Yeah.
No comment, right? I don't know. I don't know the child. Maybe the child's very loved. I hope for their sake it is. I would also hope for their sake that this is not a story that follows that child into school either. Like, can you imagine?
No.
Your schoolmates?
Like, your schoolmates know the child. They're like, oh, that was Billy?
That Billy was sexually abused as an infant, as a newborn.
You were all over the internet because you were sucking on your dad's breasts. Did you realize that? Like, this is the kind of stuff that screws kids up for life,
Yeah. Okay, and then finally this story. This is Rachel Wong. Here is her tweet that earned her a letter from the Twitter through the Australian government, saying that LGBTIQ plus org Rainbow Families paid the Australian Breastfeeding Association $20,000 to create an educational booklet about lactating and chest feeding for men. Profit before ethics, and safeguard for babies and mothers. Babies are being used as props for male perversion. Look at the handbook that now you can get from this family organization about breastfeeding, chest feeding, and human milk feeding.
Oh my God.
Supporting these communities and families. To say, and so specifically they mentioned here, that this is something men can do. Here's the violation she got, saying that, again, she's in violation of law. So I will just wrap this up by saying, these are 3 women, real women, who are being attacked by biological men who say they hurt their feelings, and you can't hurt their feelings. Again, do we stand for this? Do we stand for our governments supporting these biological men picking on real women?
No.
Do we? It's for us collectively to decide.
No, we don't. We don't. But I also want to see, if we can get tickets to Mars. If there's an opportunity for us to just create a new colony on Mars.
Yeah.
And get off this freaking place right now. Go ahead, Philip.
If it means I'll never have to hear the phrase human milk feeding again, I'm going to Mars with you.
Yeah,
that has got to be one of the most awful phrases I've ever heard.
Yeah.
What does that even mean? Is there something even grosser I haven't considered that it could mean?
I don't even know. I don't even want to think about it. How many people in the chat would love to leave this crazy?
Because what scares me the most about it is that it's not breast milk. That maybe it's not breast milk.
Well, it's full of hormones and who knows what the hell it is.
No, but I mean, what is being promoted here? Breastfeeding, chest feeding, and human milk feeding, that maybe it's not real breast milk. It's some other synthetically produced, what this person in Australia said that he produced was colostrum. Colostrum is what you make before your real milk comes in. There's no nutrients and there's no fat in it. The baby can't subsist on it. And in fact, you even sometimes have it. Don't do that. You're like this. Mm-hmm. He's like, no more breastfeeding stories. Sometimes you have it before the baby is even born. And so,
but men, I mean, come on, I don't even want to think about what it's making me sick. It's making me sick.
There's men that are actually saying they're going to have uteruses transplanted into them so that they can carry a baby. And so I think that people that have this level of need for this will have breasts made that have an injection point to inject milk in order to get that. You know what I mean? I don't think there's an extreme they will not go to in order to make them feel like they are actually the other gender.
It's transhumanism. I mean, this is exactly this is transhumanism. This is part of their agenda. I mean, this is why the World Economic Forum loves transhumanism. Like, how can the biopharmaceutical complex make billions of dollars off of this, removing biological sex from us? It's really,
I mean, in that case, it's better to bottle feed, because if you're not actually, if you don't have a breast that's breastfeeding, you're in conversation with your baby. Like, you read based on the enzymes in their mouth, your body knows how to make the right milk for them. Yeah. You're in a conversation with your baby, and if you want to simulate it with one of those like wraparound things and put formula in it, do it. Or, one person's pumping or something, fine. Right. But that's not really nursing. So, and it's also just bad for the baby for a couple of reasons. One, you know how hard women work to get a good latch, and then you're confusing a baby with not a real nipple that doesn't make that milk. Like, that's hard for the baby. And also the baby expends energy to nurse. Like, they expend calories to nurse, and they're not getting anything back. They're supposed to be getting more calories than they put out. This baby was put in a dangerous situation that was the opposite, where they were latching and not getting milk back. And it's cruel.
Yeah. Otmar says, I'm in a nightmare, and I'm with you. I'm right there with you in this nightmare. Absolutely, this is absolutely crazy. It's seriously crazy. Crazy stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
Let us know your thoughts on this in the chat below. We've got more news to get to. We're going to talk about this recession in Germany and what this means for broader Europe, because they have a plan. They're literally holding the... It's an amazing conference that they're holding. What is it called? The Beyond Growth. So
Beyond Growth.
Yeah, Beyond Growth Conference, which is a degrowth plan. So their plan is to degrow the economies in Europe, and they're actually holding a conference on how to do this, because they think, well, we'll get to it in just a second. But first, I should mention we have a store. Yeah, we have a store, redactedstore.com. Go check it out. You can support independent journalism. You can pick up a hoodie, you can pick up a t-shirt, you can pick up a hat. I was out walking the dog today, and two very kind Redacted viewers. I wasn't even wearing my Redacted hat today, and they came up to me and said, "Clayton from Redacted, I love the show. I love the show. We stopped watching Fox after they fired Tucker. We only watch Redacted." I said, "Thank you so much. Thank you so much." So, but I normally wear my Redacted hat when I take my dog walking today. So I thought maybe he would have seen my Redacted hat, but he didn't. He didn't see any of that. He loved the show. So thank you for saying hello. Very nice to see you today. And go to redactedstore.com. You can support independent journalism. Grab any of it. There's my favorite hat right there, and a hoodie, and support what we do here on the show. Redacted Store. Well, Europe's largest economy, Germany, has officially entered recession. What does this mean for Europe? What does it mean for the rest of the world? Are the policies, the Russian sanctions and awful climate policies to blame for all of this? Let's ask one of the smartest people I know. It's academic researcher Ralph Schulhammer, who has been following the decline of Germany over the past year. We've been featuring Ralph here on our show. Ralph, you've been predicting this. You predicted this was happening. I hate to say that you were right because of what it means for the rest of Europe. Good to see you, Ralph.
Good to see you, Clay. Thank you so much for the high praise. But I believe that everybody who was willing to see what was unfolding in Germany or in Europe generally was expecting this. It's a little bit of an ironic game, I would say, that is currently played, and we see this in the case of other countries as well. So we have the first measurement of economic data, and then the revisions come in. So first there's slight growth, then there is no growth, and then there was negative growth, or in this case now in Germany, it's a recession. If we look at manufacturing data in detail, particularly in the energy intensive industries, this is an energy induced recession, something we talked about a year ago, I think, that this is how it's going to play out. And everybody who believes in reality, I have to say, must have seen it coming. Like, you cannot be an industrial producing nation if you don't have energy. Everything needs to be made at some point, and everything that needs to be made or gets made needs energy. It is that simple. And we're struggling against reality, and now it sets in.
And so you have a lot of manufacturing, of course, a lot of big companies that rely on energy, rely on natural gas, rely on nuclear power to run their businesses, are closing down, shutting down as a result of this. These politicians knew this was happening. They knew it would happen. It almost sounds like it was calculated. To a cynical eye, it sounds like it was calculated. No?
No, I think it's two things that combine. So there is one group of people, of which I think we're going to talk in a second, who definitely want this to happen, right? They see it as a kind of virtue, atonement for the sins of the past. So after the West has been the exploiter, now it's time for us, in a sense, to throw our economy like the metaphorical virgin into a volcano to abandon the sins that we have committed. And then, which I think is the bigger group, I think the political class doesn't know. They have no clue how industry works. They have no clue how commodity markets work. I mean, we saw this with the sanctions against Russia. If you look at the sanctions, how they were imposed on the Russian energy sector, this is how, I don't know, a second-year intern at McKinsey would do it, right? This was done in a way that completely has no understanding how commodity markets work, which is why Russia, that was supposedly going to break down under this sanction, is still doing fairly well under these conditions, because they know how the commodity markets work, whereas Western politicians don't. And the same is true for industry in general, right? They don't know how stuff is made. They don't know where things come from. And this is a very, very worrisome trend. So we have radicals on one side. We have, as I say, incompetent groups on the other side. But together they are a formidable force that is very hard to overcome.
Of course, you've been ringing this alarm bell. Hey, here's what's going to happen. You follow these ridiculous climate policies. You shut down your nuclear power. this is going to happen. So what does this mean for Germany? Now, we are technically in a recession. Europe's largest economy is in a recession. What does it mean for Germany, and what does it mean for Europe?
Well, to give you one example, which I find is, it would be sad if it wouldn't be partially so hilarious. So one of the major export products now from China to Europe is electric cars. And one of the major exports from Europe to China is traditional internal combustion engine cars. Now, what is the European Union banning? Internal combustion engines. So you create a situation where you destroy your export product and at the same time increase the imports from a global competitor. So just in a nutshell, to show the insanity of the policies. By the way, the same is true in renewables. As I'm sure some of your listeners and viewers know, the supply chain when it comes to wind, solar and batteries is 87% under the control of China. So, I mean, good for the Chinese, but that's really bad for us. So we thought that dependence on Russian gas is a problem. Well, you wait for the dependence on Chinese photovoltaic and Chinese wind turbines. It's just going to be equally worse. So this is a sense of, I cannot call it any differently, it's a sense of economic suicide. And it's driven by, one has to speak openly about this. There is an agenda behind this, as I said before, some who want it, some who are kind of caught up in it, and of course also a media that is entirely silent, with the exception of things like Redacted, right? That is entirely silent on what has happening over the last couple of years, and then always act to be surprised. I mean, we saw it also today with the revised German numbers, like surprising downturn, surprised numbers. No, none of this was surprising. I mean, this was supposed to happen.
Right. You've been predicting it. We've been talking about it here on the show. All of the signs were pointing to it. When you shut down your nuclear power, when you go blindly into these ridiculous climate policies, this was going to happen. When you heap enormous sanctions on Russia and cut off your flow of natural gas, you look the other way when the Nord Stream pipeline is blown up. Yes, all of this was bound to happen. This is ridiculous. And you're right. And the West, well, the United States is in many ways cheering this on, right? The decline of Europe means the rise of the US dollar. So the United States is going to sort of sit back and let Europe shoot itself in the foot. And it seems like they are shooting themselves in the foot. Right now, they're holding the Beyond Growth Conference. And I want to get your take on this. This is unbelievable what they're planning in Europe, which is the idea of degrowth. So they're literally holding a conference right now on how do we not grow? I mean, it's absolute insanity. I just want to play for you one of the speakers that they brought in to speak at this conference and get your take on this. Let's listen.
Infinite growth on finite resources is not only a myth, but it's extractivist and ruthlessly oppressive by design. So when talking about growth and defending growth, there is a very important first question that we need to ask ourselves. Who are we growing this economy for? And what stories do we use to justify it? We have to acknowledge what lays below our growth. White supremacy, colonialism, and imperialism. White supremacy justifies a global system of exploitation and extractivism. Colonialism lays at the foundations of the European economy, institutions, corporate value chains, trade deals, investment agreements, and geopolitical structures of wealth accumulation, which means that there is no degrowth without decolonization. We need to take these conversations outside of these rooms and make sure that for all of the hundreds of fossil fuel lobbyists demanding growth, there are thousands of us demanding degrowth. We need to redistribute wealth, cancel climate debt, implement a universal basic income, massively invest in loss and damage funds, degrow the economy in high-income countries, increase universal public services, reduce working time, dematerialize, and reprioritize what it means to live a human life.
So, Ralph, white supremacy is at the heart of growth. A growth economy means it's white supremacy. And there's so many people in the audience that are shaking their heads right along with this. This is Europe right now.
Well, I think it's as bad in the United States, right? You cannot have a debate about anything, and at some point it's going to be white supremacy, colonialism, or any of these buzzwords that are used by these pseudo-intellectuals. And that's what they are. Like the degrowth movement is a quasi-religious pseudo-intellectual movement. They have no footing in reality. This has to be said. And one thing we have to keep in mind, and we did talk about this previously, is that, of course, a lot of this kind of environmental economic agenda is driven by a boredom by an elite class. And just to give you an example of this, this Beyond Growth conference was organized by the European Parliament. Everybody who's a member of the European Parliament makes around 100,000 euros a year. Ursula von der Leyen, who opened the event, makes almost 400,000 euros a year, and that does not include all the benefits that they get. So this is a very, very wealthy, very rich class that revels in the idea to tell others that they have to adapt to lower living standards. And of course, they themselves, because they are so virtuous, are exempt from it. I mean, a lot of that was said at that conference is, to be quite honest, is quite ludicrous. I mean, the idea is that we have to live poorer lives in the future to save the planet, yet they themselves, of course, they cannot join us in doing this because they need to have access to these higher living standards because they are like the Praetorian Guard who is going to save the planet. Now, this is very comfortable for them, but of course, it's going to be very uncomfortable for us.
And of course, a number of these people, in order to research the degrowth process, the European Union has been handing out like, what, a boatload of money to these people. So all of these people are getting millions, right, in order to research how the rest of us should not eat meat and turn off our electricity, turn off our heaters and all of these other things. Am I right?
Yeah, it's even worse than that, right? The European Research Council has now pumped 10 million euros, which is not a lot of money for them, but it's a lot of money for everybody else, into this kind of, and I call it under scary quotes, into this kind of research, because it is activism. If you read the publications out of the degrowth movement, this is not scientific inquiry. This is, as in the clip that you played, this is an ideological agenda that comes under the guise of science, but it is pseudoscience, nothing else. That European taxpayers have to finance this and are kind of paying for the mud through which they are going to be dragged is, to be quite honest, is in many ways cruel. And this is an open debate that one has to have, because if the point of the idea of the European Union or of the European states is to create conditions where life for their people is becoming more miserable and less prosperous. I mean, all of them are basically in violation of their oath of office. The reason why we have governments is to create conditions in which we can live life to our fullest potential. We are not just pawns in somebody's ideological game where they feel good about themselves at whatever cost it comes to that, of course, somebody else, in this case us, has to bear. So this is a little bit of a revolt by the elite against the masses. It's very similar to France in 1789, shortly before the revolution, where an elite lives over its lives according to its own ideological devices, and then they want somebody else to foot the bill for it. And I don't think we should accept that.
Right. That kind of thinking, though, Ralph, apparently it's white supremacy, it's colonialism. So, you know, we got to watch out. Our sort of free thinking here is really anti-establishment right now. It's really troubling. Ralph Scholhammer, always great to see you, my friend. Thank you for your insights as always. And you know, this degrowth, I mean, this is in Europe, but I have to imagine the United States is going to be jumping on board with this in an organized fashion soon, don't you think? I mean, we hear about it in the United States. Cut back, don't spend as much, stop eating meat. We see it in New York City. Eric Adams, the mayor, wants to track how much meat you're eating. We don't have a degrowth conference yet, but I imagine that's got to be coming.
No, absolutely. And we see this just as a quick other tidbit. I mean, now you have in Germany, they're planning a law for energy efficiency that the government can basically see how much electricity you're using on a regular basis or on a minute basis. I mean, this is surveillance. I mean, this is what we're moving towards. And the United States are a little bit further behind on this track, but they're moving in the same direction. They're trying to do the same thing. So all the environmental insanity that you see, particularly in Germany, but in other parts of Europe as well, the United States, at least under the current administration, are planning to do similar things. I mean, this is, again, if you make energy more expensive, you make life for the average person more miserable. It is really that simple. Now, they call it now in all these fancy terms, you know, degrowth, or as you say, then they cloak it in this idea, this is how we atone for the past, this is how we atone for white supremacy. But to be quite honest, People of color will suffer from this the most. Let me just give you one quick tidbit. Most people in sub-Saharan Africa have access to the same amount of energy as somebody in France or Germany had in 1860. Do you really believe that they simply are going to accept this for the rest of their life? That they're going to say, in order to save the planet, we have to stay poor for eternity? They are simply not going to go along with this. And they shouldn't, to be honest. Like, they should have access to higher lifestyles, as should people have in Europe and the United States. So this is, as I said, it's only, if you take a closer look, it's only the very wealthy and unfortunately very often taxpayer funded who talk about this. But you never hear poor people getting into the streets and saying, tax us more, take away more from us, make our bills higher. It's always those who can afford it that say it has to get more expensive. We have to be very, very careful here.
Yeah, you're right. The poor, the middle class will absolutely be crushed the most. We've seen that absolutely already with these Russian sanctions. We see what's happening in Colombia. We see what's happened in Sri Lanka. These countries get hit hardest first, and then it trickles up from there. Ralph, great to see you. Thank you so much for your insights on this, and we'll keep an eye on what happens in Europe.
Thank you.
And our thanks to Ralph. And our thanks to all of you for making Redacted a part of your daily viewing habits. We really, really appreciate it. I should mention, if you'd like to support what we do here on the show, we have a Redacted community, our Redacted Rebels community. For the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support independent journalism and become a part of that community. Again, this show that you're watching, of course, is totally free. Watch us on YouTube. You can watch us on Rumble. You can watch us on Twitter. But if you'd like to support what we do here, if you go to redacted.inc, that's the website. And on the right side of your screen there, you can click on the community tab there and become a member of our VIP, our Redacted Rebel VIP community, where we publish exclusive content, live streams just for our community members and Redacted Rebels, and early access to videos before anyone else gets to see them. Also, it's just a way to be a part of our community and to support what we do. Again, the show is totally free, but if you want to support what we do, we don't take money from billionaires. We're not funded by any of these big corporatists that run all of the mainstream media. So our thanks to you for supporting Redacted. And we hope you have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Of course, we'll be back here on Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll have content that will be going out over the weekend as well. So thank you so much for subscribing and being a part of our great community here. So we will see you back here on Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Much love to all of you guys. Have a great night.